Today's verse is from the 17th chapter, verses well, it's verse number 8, but there's no purport, so I'm going to do 8, 9, and 10. Is that okay, Sasha?
Yes.
Okay. Foods dear to those in the mode of goodness increase the duration of life, purify one's existence, and give strength, health, happiness, and satisfaction. Such foods are juicy, fatty, wholesome, and pleasing to the heart. So I'm going to continue. Here's some words that we know. Ayu is Ayur. It's the same as Ayurveda. So it means knowledge of life, or the duration of life. Sattva, most people know sattva means goodness. It also means existence and sometimes truth. Bala, as in Balaram, which means strength. Sukha, most people know sukha. Sukha dukkha. Sukha means happiness. Dukkha means distress. So these are very common words. If whoever knows a few of these, a few Sanskrit verses, you know those. Rasya is juicy. Rasa means, it can mean juice, it can mean mellow or relationship, but it has this sense of taste or juicy. Hridya means pleasing to the heart. Hrid means heart. So there's devotees with names like Dayananda and any other Hrid names?
Hridai Chaitanya.
Hridai Chaitanya, yeah. Other Hrid. Ahara means food. Priya means Priya. I always wonder if Pyar comes from Priya, but anyway, I can't say for sure. But Pyar in Hindi means kind of like dear friend. Priya means dear. So I'm going to read 3 verses. Katvam la lavanat ushna, lavanati ushna, tikshna ruksha vidahina ahara rajasasyeshta dukkha shokamaya prada. Foods that are too bitter, too sour, salty, hot, pungent, dry, and burning are dear to those that are in the mode of passion. Such foods cause distress, misery, and disease. Yata yamang gatarasam puti paryushitang chayat uchistang api cha medhyang bhojanang tamasapriyam. Foods prepared more than 3 hours before being eaten, food that is tasteless, decomposed, and putrid, and food consisting of remnants and untouchable things is dear to those in the mode of darkness. So we're discussing from the previous verse. The previous verse said that there are 3 kinds of foods according to the 3 qualities of nature or modes of nature. We say, our gurus say modes of nature, but some people call them qualities or attributes. In Sanskrit, guna, the word guna means a quality or attribute of nature. And it's considered that there are 3, according to Sankhya philosophy, there are 3, sattva, rajas, and tama. So these 3 come with creation. So whenever anything is created, including the universe, when the universe is created, it's divided into 3 areas. Generally the heavens, the middle realm, which the earth exists in the middle realm, and then the lower realms, which are tamas, which are ignorance, darkness. Ignorant means also, it's also called darkness. It also refers to darkness. So many things, everything practically in this world is influenced by these three aspects of nature, three attributes, and including our bodies, the way we behave, our surroundings, and here Krishna is describing how foods are also categorized in these three areas, sattva, rajas, tamas. And devotees try to eat sattvic food, or foods in goodness. Prabhupada says in his purport, the purpose of food is to increase the duration of life, purify the mind, and aid bodily strength. This is the only purpose. In the past, great authorities selected those foods that best aid health and increase life's duration, such as milk products, sugar, rice, wheat, fruits, and vegetables. These foods are very dear to those in the mode of goodness. Some other foods, such as baked corn and molasses, which are not very palatable in themselves, can be made pleasant when mixed with milk or other foods. They are then in the mode of goodness. All these foods are pure by nature. They are quite distinct from untouchable things like meat and liquor. Fatty foods, as mentioned in the 8th verse, have no connection with animal fat obtained by slaughter. Animal fat is available in the form of milk, which is the most wonderful of all foods. Milk, butter, cheese, and similar products give animal fat in a form which rules out any need for the killing of innocent creatures. It's only through brute mentality that this killing goes on. The civilized method of obtaining needed fat is by milk. Slaughter is the way of subhumans. Protein is amply available through split peas, dal, whole wheat, and so forth. Foods in the mode of passion, which are bitter, too salty, or too hot, or overly mixed with red peppers, cause misery by reducing the mucus in the stomach, leading to disease. Foods in the mode of ignorance or darkness are essentially those that are not fresh. Any food cooked more than 3 hours before it's eaten, except prasadam, the food offered to the Lord, is considered to be in the mode of darkness. Because they're decomposing, such foods give a bad odor, which often attracts people in this mode, but repulses those in the mode of goodness. Now, this is an important part. Prabhupada explains that remnants of food may be eaten only when they are part of a meal that was first offered to the Supreme Lord, or first eaten by saintly persons, especially the spiritual master. Otherwise, the remnants of food are considered to be in the mode of darkness, and they increase infection or disease. Such foodstuffs, although very palatable to persons in the mode of darkness, are neither liked nor even touched by those in the mode of goodness. The best food is the remnants of what is offered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Bhagavad-gita, the Supreme Lord says that he accepts preparation of vegetables, flour, and milk when offered with devotion. Patrang, pushpang, phalang, toyang. Of course, devotion and love are the chief things which the Supreme Personality of Godhead accepts. But it is also mentioned that the prasadam should be prepared in a particular way. Any food prepared by the injunctions of the scripture and offered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be taken even if prepared long, long ago, because such food is transcendental. Therefore, to make food antiseptic, edible, and palatable for all persons, one should offer food to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, I decided I'd like to talk about three things briefly, just to give some overview, some ideas maybe for discussion or for thought. Starting with food, it's, in my mind, it's very technical. It talks about different aspects of food. But there are two statements Prabhupada makes. First, the purpose of food is longevity and mental and physical health. So mental and physical health, they tie in well to the process of yoga. Yoga means to control the mind and body. Or yoga, that's not the actual meaning, but the implication is that yoga provides a discipline for controlling the mind and the body. What's the purpose of controlling the mind and the body? It's to direct the intelligence and all of one's faculties to the Supreme, to the soul and the Supreme Soul, inward toward the soul and the Supreme Soul. So foods also contribute to this. So Prabhupada says to keep the mind and body healthy means that we should eat foods that contribute to our, or assist in our yoga process. Then Prabhupada explains that the best food is the remnant which is offered to the Supreme, or to the Vaishnavas or spiritual master. And that food, those foods are prasadam. So this is also, this is the process of bhakti, especially, that, as Prabhupada explains, that the most important ingredient is love. Of course, devotion and love are the chief things which the Supreme Personality of Godhead accepts. That's the process of bhakti. So there's sattvic food, rajasic, tamasic. We try to take sattvic food, but the most important thing, yes, we try to offer sattvic food to Krishna, to the Vaishnavas. But more important than sattvic food is to accept the food that's offered as prasadam. There's two other things I wanted to discuss for, as I said, just kind of in brief to give some ideas. These are things that I've been working on for some years. I want to talk about the environment, or how the Gita or Vaishnava culture relates to the environment. And as a follow-on to that, I'd like to speak a little bit about science and technology, modern scientific world, or world of technology. So the environment, how is a lot of times you hear devotees, those who are experienced in, those who have attended many classes, you often hear the speaker, or you read in the literature, and it seems to be directed as a, let's say, revolution of consciousness or change of consciousness, Krishna consciousness, that meaning that we change our consciousness to Krishna consciousness, or we practice the yoga process, bhakti yoga. It sounds like an individual practice, but there's a community aspect. We already get the hint that there's a community aspect because of Sankirtan. Sang means together. It also means perfected. So perfected kirtan, or kirtan that's done together with others. So that's communal. But beyond that, there's a communal system that Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad-gita. And the Vaishnavas have been practicing in communities. The Vaishnavas have a culture that's thousands of years old. So the idea of the environment, sometimes devotees say to me, well, that's nice. That's good that you're presenting the environment aspect of Krishna consciousness. But I don't feel as though I'm presenting the environmental aspect of Krishna consciousness. I feel that I'm presenting the community aspect or the cultural aspect of Vaishnavism. So that means that because in my analysis, the Vaishnava culture has the potential to address environmental issues. I lead with the environment. But my argument is that we need to establish Vaishnava culture. This is something that Prabhupada introduced. In the beginning, it was very simple, but later on, he said, let's establish farms. And there are a number of farms around the world. It's very difficult for city people to sort of go back in the country and become rural people again. But the idea of these farms was to establish little villages, not just that devotees should go and farm and take care of cows, but that there should be complete self-sustaining villages. And this idea actually is similar to, if you read some of Gandhi's writings and some of his lectures, you can see it's very similar to what Gandhi was urging people to do in India. And those of us who visited India in the 70s, we even saw the sort of the remnants of this village life much more prominently than it is today. Today, it's become very urban. But even today, India is 50% rural. And the US hasn't been 50% rural for probably at least 100 years. I've been looking at the numbers. There was in the 20th century, even in the 19th and 20th century, there was a change between sort of 20%, 80% rural and city to 20 and 80, rural and city, where 80% of the people were in, it was more agrarian. 80% of people were in rural areas, and then it changed to 80% in urban areas. So the point that I wanted to make is that environmental disasters are caused by human greed. This is what I've identified. And Krishna also identifies the same thing. He says that our problem is sense gratification, which is the sister of greed. So the Vaishnava culture addresses this. Vaishnava culture is a simple culture. And this culture, this American culture, is more heavily based on greed. Of course, it's impossible to completely eradicate these things, but at least if we have a culture, just like a culture of bhakti, we're trying to cultivate bhakti. We have a group for bhakti. We have some kirtan, means we chant together. So we try to cultivate this as a society. So if we have a culture, as Prabhupada wished to introduce, then it becomes an effective vehicle for curbing this greed. It becomes an effective vehicle for resolving environmental disaster. And that doesn't just mean these farms and these communities. It means there's another component which is very important, and that's yajna. Those who are familiar with this philosophy, you know what yajna means. It means sacrifice. And I keep using the word sacrifice, and my friends say, Dayananda, be careful, don't use sacrifice, because the first thing that people think of is human sacrifice. But it's far from that. And if you read Krishna's Gita in the 3rd and 4th chapters, you see that Krishna describes sacrifice in many different ways. The process that we follow, the sacrifice that we follow specifically, is, although we're supposed to say Harinam Sankirtan, I like to say celebration. Our sacrifice is celebrating Krishna's names and his leelas, his pastimes or his plays when he comes into this world. So this celebration gives, it's a sacrifice to the Supreme, just like the ancient sacrifices of that in the Vedic times, people would offer grains and ghee into the fire. So our offering of these names and these celebrations is our modern sacrifice. And it's, in fact, these kinds of mantras were chanted from ancient times. It's not as though mantras are anything new. So mantras as a part of sacrifice is something very ancient. And you can find this word kirtan or anukirtan in the Vedas. So sacrifice is this we can do more effectively in cities. We can have wonderful celebrations. Rather than sacrifice, I'm substituting celebration. We can have wonderful celebration. What kind of celebration? Well, like the Rath Yatra. We just have one Rath Yatra in New York, but we could have one a month or weekly in Leela Manjari, right? That's your name. Leela Manjari and I were just talking before the program. Leela Manjari was a devotee in New York in the 1970s. And at that time, of course, now we have the Harinam in Union Square Park, and then devotees go in the subways. But at that time in the 70s, the devotees would go into Times Square, and not only were they chanting and singing, but every once in a while it would stop, and then devotees would put on a play, a drama, and then hand out prasad, ladus, thousands and thousands. So it became a celebration. Even the simple Harinam, chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this Harinam Kirtan is not simply the chanting, but it's also celebrating the leelas of Krishna by dramas, by distributing prasadam, and there can be many other vehicles for these kinds of celebration. So this is the process. Celebrating, so these are the two things that I'm trying to emphasize when discussing the solution to environmental disaster. Celebration and establishing these small communities or village-type communities. And what is the purpose of this? It's to curb greed. It's the same purpose as yoga. If you read in the Gita, you'll see that a big purpose is to curb sense gratification or yoga and redirect the mind and body towards the soul and the Supreme Soul. So what's preventing this, or what is a big cause for, what is there's something in the way, it's the American culture, Western culture, Western culture has become more and more based on American. World culture has become more and more based on American culture. I just read an article in the BBC news that this article was saying that the American consumption of meat, Americans kill about 2 billion animals, cows, pigs, chickens, and so forth, every year. And the American consumption of meat is more than most places in the world. But now, most places in the world, I was just living in Bangalore, and I saw that they had McDonald's and KFC and Taco Bell and all these. So when we visited in the 70s, there was no such thing. But the Americans have exported their taste for eating meat and also the American greed. We don't notice it, and we think that we are environmentally friendly when we clean up something. When we have a nice, neat, maybe we have a dirty river and we clean it up, then we think, oh, we're environmentally friendly. But Americans use 1/4 of the world's energy production, and we're 5% of the population. So if we were going to share a plate of prasadam between a few of us, maybe there's 5 of us, and I take half and leave the rest for you, that's greedy. So that's not polite. So the American culture is definitely an example of greed. And I like to talk about science and technology. Now, we're very attached to technology. And we define civilization in terms of technology. Recently I read an article, I've forgotten what it was, but it was talking about technology in terms of how advanced the culture was. Now, if you study history and you say, maybe they're talking about Babylonian history or something, then often the modern historian will say, well, they had some advanced technology. So this indicates that they were an advanced culture. So, and we like to compare ourselves with others. Americans have advanced technology. We're great because we have advanced. Those who don't have advanced technology are less. And then if somebody is developing more advanced technology, maybe the Chinese, then we become concerned. The Chinese are pulling ahead of us. What is that, pulling ahead of us? We're basing this whole concept on science and technology. But what is it that gets us in that we express our greed through science and technology? We have big machines and big equipment and all sorts of technology in order to exploit the Earth's resources, to kill off species, to basically destroy the environment. So the thing that we elevate, this science and technology, it's not really very good for us. And science one could argue that science has only existed for 200 or 300 years. And what do I mean by that? I mean modern science. In the ancient times, there was a moral component to science. Now, most people, the vast majority of scientists and people who teach science, they will say that science is amoral. Means that it's neither moral nor immoral. Amoral just means that there's no moral component to science. But beyond 300 years, there were different perspectives on science. But beyond 300 years, there were discussions of how things should be applied, how should science be used. So science now is mainly business people and politicians decide how science should be used. Other people as well. But for example, Albert Einstein and others developed the basic science to produce an atomic bomb. And then when they realized, a few scientists like Albert Einstein realized that the atomic bomb was going to be used to bomb the Japanese, they asked the government not to use it. But it was out of their hands. There's no component of science that restricts the use of the atomic bomb. They have to turn it over to politicians and business people. And these people also are in a democratic society. You could argue against this, but in a democratic society, politicians and business people really base their businesses and their policies on the people in general. Of course, that's debatable, but anyway, that's supposed to be the system. So we're all complicit in this misuse of science and technology. There's no dharmic component. Dharma, which is the ancient, dharma means codes or rules. It also implies responsibility. So there should be responsibility. There should be a component of responsibility along with science and technology. But there's no such guidebook. In other words, if you have an atomic bomb, it doesn't come with a guidebook that says you can never use this thing, ever. It just doesn't, it's not there within the purview of science. In the Bhagavatam, we can read that there was some kind of weapon that could destroy like an atomic bomb. But if that weapon was misused, then it would backfire. So we get some hint that there was probably, and not only that, but the politicians and the business people were much, as a part of the culture, they were much more attuned to listen to the intellectual class, the sort of science class, those who were in the knowledge-bearing class. So one thing I don't like also is that, regarding science, is that science is also a new word within the last, I was just reading, maybe in the 1800s, this word science began, or scientist. Now the origin of the word science is just knowledge. So if we have knowledge, why aren't we scientists? Oh, because they've co-opted the word. They say knowledge is only based on scientific method, which is observation and experimentation. So unless you have observation and experiment, you can't say that you have actual knowledge. You're just religious. In the Indian system, there are 6 darshans, it's called. So within the ancient Indian system, there are 6 schools that discuss how to derive knowledge. So in the modern world, science considers itself the only school for obtaining true knowledge. And they admit that it's just knowledge of the world. Physical knowledge, material knowledge. And they're very reluctant to go further than that. And they're in control. basically science and technology is in control. Whether we believe in science or not, or whether we're whatever our position is, the technology that's derived from science is the thing that's driving everything. As I look out of on the street driving, there are these cars. The technology is, cars are relatively new. Everybody knows that all the information technology is new. So these things are quite new, and they all work together to accelerate us toward environmental problems. So am I saying that science and technology is at fault? No, I'm not saying that. Greed is the problem. But the way science and technology is administrated, the way it exists today, it's used to accelerate greed. The societies that have the most science and technology are in fact the backward societies, because they're accelerating greed at a greater rate than those without science and technology. So we should investigate that and understand how to curb greed. And Prabhupada's proposal is to introduce Vaishnava culture. We have, up to what time, Prabhu?
It can, sometimes 7:30 if that's okay with you, or it can be a little less.
Yeah, I'll go up to 7 and then we can have discussion. So, Prabhupada wanted to introduce Vaishnava culture, which again are focused, I don't want to be overly simplistic, but celebrations and these simple communities that he wanted to establish in rural areas based on the agrarian model. And whatever science and technology there is should be used to enhance enhance the Vaishnava culture. And they shouldn't be used to allow or to enable our tendency. We have a natural tendency toward greed, towards sense gratification. But we've studied to some degree what yoga is. Yoga is meant to redirect our sense gratification toward connecting with the soul and the Supreme. So the Vaishnava culture is a rich culture, and it's most often based on Krishna Vishnu Leela. All of these wonderful Leelas that are in the Bhagavatam and other Puranas. So this culture is based on that. There's drama, there's art. The art is rich. The drama, there are so many aspects to the culture. Cuisine, these things that the culture is incredibly rich. So if somehow or other we as individuals and as groups can manage to enjoy ourselves by being absorbed in the name of Krishna and the Leela of Krishna, Leelas, not just one, but many, many, many Leelas, then we can, and at the same time, we gradually curb our desires for sense gratification. And it's natural that in a culture that emphasizes celebration, we spend our money on big celebrations rather than celebrating just when I came, I changed my clothes in First Avenue, 25 First Avenue. So then I walked around, of course, you see all the nightlife, the people celebrating. So they're celebrating their material life. All of this, it's based on sense gratification, based on identification with the body. So we have another kind of celebration if we can use as many faculties as we have, our time, our money, or whatever. If we have no time, maybe we have money. If we have no money, maybe we have time. Or if we don't have both, either one, what's wrong with you? No, I'm just kidding. But whatever we have, if we can use that to become absorbed in leelas, then that will be the best use of our resources. And if you study the Gita philosophy, you'll see that being absorbed in these leelas, that can help curb greed and subdue some of these, or perhaps even the majority of these environmental disasters. Now, I'll just close by saying that somebody may object that, well, this is a religious thing. You're promoting religion. In a sense, the Leelas advertise the incarnations of Vishnu. So, yeah, you could argue that this is that we're talking about God, the Supreme Lord. But let's take the concept of God or religion out of this, and let's say that Vaishnava culture is based on stories, being absorbed in stories, and living simple lives, and being satisfied as a culture with all these stories. Now, God or no God, this is the method for subduing greed. So if you have a culture that can come up with stories that have nothing to do with the God, that's fine. But this is an ancient culture, a culture that's millennia old. It's thousands of years old. It's a culture that's proven to have reduced greed. So why do you complain that this one component, that the stories are based on God? So what is your method for curbing greed? Now, socialists can say that, or liberals or socialists will say that, well, we'll pass laws against the capitalists who are ruining the planet. But that doesn't address greed. Greed is still going to exist. And then, of course, there's feminists who say that it's the patriarchal system. Well, that's fine. Then establish a matriarchal system, but it's not proven. I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with a matriarchal system as long as we can reduce greed. We have Krishna's Leela, and we can have some vehicle for it. Just because there's a slight difference in mentality between matriarchal and patriarchal, there's no proof really that the female mind would be less greedy. How could one say that we are all greedy equally? I think this is something, maybe women make less pay, but I think we all share in greed. Maybe even if women are less greedy, still greed exists. So there are many people who subscribe to this idea of cultural change. Generally, it's called deep ecology.
What's it called?
Deep ecology. And these people subscribe to cultural change or to major change in society, as opposed to minor adjustments, like some scientific adjustment. The Kyoto treaty or the Paris Treaty that governments, they try to reduce they have goals for reducing the consumption of carbon-based energy and reducing the temperature by 1 degree. So these are, according to deep ecology, these are superficial. So Krishna consciousness is very deep. So it qualifies as changing the culture, to changing the American culture and the dominant Western culture to Vaishnava culture, qualifies as a sort of a member of the deep ecology concept. Not that we're conforming to anything in particular, but just to communicate the idea to people. We're interested in making a cultural change to Vaishnava culture. So this is my response to those who say to me, well, Dayananda, that's nice, you're talking about environmental preaching, but really what I'm saying is that as opposed to the individual attempt to advance in Bhakti Yoga, this is a way to establish Vaishnava culture, which is establishing a field for Bhakti to grow. When we have all these celebrations of Vishnu's Leelas, when we have simple communities, these are basically establishing the field for Bhakti. So at 7 o'clock, I'd like to open for discussion, whatever you'd like to say on Bhagavad-gita or questions, comments.
I have a question. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada is speaking about milk being the miracle food. And we know that it's, in an agricultural society where cows are raised humanely and not slaughtered, that it's like considered ahimsa milk or, non-violent. But now we're in a society mostly, especially here in the West, where mostly all the dairy and all the milk is not, it's all like based on violence, basically. So there's a big debate in the movement, the Hare Krishna movement, about being vegan, about not being vegan, about accepting milk that's from the store, that's not from cows that are not going to be, like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also, it also does come into play as an environmental issue. Because they also said that cow slaughter contributes to the damage of the environment in a very big way.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of talk about all that?
Yes, well, the idea of addressing one specific aspect that's harmful to the environment is really not. It's not a part of. It's not a part of deep ecology. It's not a part of Vaishnava culture, really. At the heart of Vaishnava culture is yajna. So, so there are a number of groups. They're ancient. These Jains, for example. The Jains don't. They don't kill any insect. The Jain sages, they walk around with masks over their faces so that they don't breathe any insects. They have whisks that they whisk in front of them so that they don't kill insects. And the people who are members of that community don't eat potatoes or any root vegetable because that kills the vegetable. But our system is yajna. Our system is that we are connecting with the Supreme through yajna. That's our connection. And that's our way of curbing greed. Now this idea of ahimsa, or of being overly focused on purification, on purity, not exploiting animals, that's nice, but it's not really part of our system. I mean, if somebody decides that, well, I'm going to be a Vaishnava, but I'm also going to follow the Jain system. I'm not going to eat potatoes anymore because that kills. I mean, that's all right, but that's really not. That's not a central focus of what we are doing. Really, we really focus on these celebrations. So if this dialogue that about veganism, it becomes too prominent, then it distracts from our celebration of names and leelas, then it's not really a useful dialogue. And it doesn't address any, there are so many contaminations. I mean, one of the themes of the vegan doctrine is non-exploitation of animals. So strict vegans don't like to keep pets, or if they do, then there's an argument within the vegan community whether or not to keep pets. They don't eat honey because that exploits the bees. They might eat something. I don't know if this is still a controversy, but they might eat something like mussels, so shellfish, because they believe that it has no central nervous system and it can't experience pain. So their concept really is different from our fundamental concept. They're overly, in my opinion, they're overly concerned with, well, just Prabhupada indicated something very similar to this, that just because someone is vegetarian doesn't mean that person is necessarily a devotee or somebody within our Vaishnava culture. So the idea of vegan, this over concern with not exploiting animals, we're a part of a culture that wants to simplify life. So we believe that we should use the bulls or the oxen to plow the fields, because the technology that we've developed, we live in an artificial world. Based on this technology, there are animals around us. We can use these animals for labor. So in that sense, you could say that we're exploiting them. But that's not the way we look at it. We're engaging them in labor. And everyone should be engaged in some kind of labor. But based on some modern morality, based on this concept, they don't want to. So if you go to India, you see the elephants are used for labor, camels are used. In the Middle East, you see camels all over the place. People are riding on these. They tame the camels. They ride on the. I'm not sure what the vegan. My granddaughter is vegan, so I'm not sure what the view on camels is, using camels for labor. In India, you see camels. There's a huge camel market in Rajasthan, and you see camels pulling carts. So elephants, camels, buffalo, cows, all these large animals are used for labor. So it's a different cultural perspective. And just to be sensitized. People are sensitized regarding this sort of modern concept. Well, we shouldn't exploit, but we're exploiting the earth by driving cars. Or by taking a bus or an airplane. Airplanes are hugely. So should vegans stop riding an airplane? My granddaughter takes airplanes, so we don't have big debates. But this is really, in my view, this is really a part of the sort of the modern morality that that doesn't take into account the way we've evolved over the last 200-300 years, far away from a natural agrarian society. Horses, we were used to using horses to plow fields in this country. So does that mean, according to the vegan idea, they wouldn't want to?
I wasn't really trying to focus on the vegan as much as cow protection, since it's like a mainstay of Prabhupada's viewpoint and presentation for Varnashram, for us as devotees to go that route.
Yes and no. You're saying that the cow protection is a mainstay, it's a main focus, but I would say that...
Oh, the prayer right there, Namo Brahmanya Devaya, Go Brahmanaya.
Yeah.
Krishna putting the cows even ahead of the Brahmins.
Yes. But it's a part of a culture. So if you just have a barn with a bunch of cows and you're taking care of the cows, and you drive in with your Ford Explorer and drop off some hay, and then I don't see that. That's nice. That's very nice that you're taking care of the cows. But Prabhupada's desire was to have a village, a rural environment in which the cows are being taken care of, and you have a whole variety of other things, people who are contributing to the society according to their natural talents. So we're far from that. And just to overemphasize one thing, I personally don't appreciate when there's a big controversy or discussion. There has to be controversy. We love conflict. If you read a novel, there's conflict. I was learning how to write, so I was reading this book, and it says you can't have dialogue in a novel if there's not conflict. You can't say, "Hi, how are you doing this morning?" "I'm doing fine." There's no such dialogue in a novel. They'll say, "Hi, how's it going?" "It's horrible." That's the dialogue from I just lost my boyfriend. That's a romance novel. Or Sam just got killed. That's a thriller, something. So we thrive on conflict. You can't read a novel, you can't go to a movie, you can't. So it's natural that there should be some conflict. But if it gets in the way of our principal themes, which is trying to do what we can to start these communities and trying to celebrate. Okay, maybe establishing these communities is very difficult. There may be one or two that's a little successful in the world. But we can have celebrations. I mean, you participate in a celebration practically every day, which is the Harinam. So this is the important thing. This other, well, it's pure to drink this milk, or it's impure. That's all right. That's a valid discussion. We're addicted to these kinds of discussions. But if it gets in the way, and if it places too many barriers, sometimes the discussions place barriers. Oh, everything's going to hell in this way. No, it's not. It's going to hell in this other way. So these kinds of discussions are not useful. We have to try to find out, because we already know, if we study the philosophy carefully, that that this is a hellish. Dukkalayam ashashvatam is a line from the Gita. Dukkalayam, it means it's the kind of the resting place for suffering. Ashashvatam means it's impermanent. So we know already this is an undesirable place, so if we focus on it too much and it inhibits our direction forward, we have to clearly see what our direction forward is. And if people argue, well, our direction forward is to just protect cows and not drink this milk, I would argue that no, the primary direction forward are these celebrations and doing whatever we can to establish these rural communities. But here in the city, celebrations. And along with that is distribution of knowledge. We have that obligation. Chaitanya sent out his closest associates, Dayananda prabhu and others, to share the knowledge. Atmanivedana prabhu was famous in all of ISKCON for distributing books. And that's why he's here. Even though he's a busy man, a lawyer, he has his own firm, he's a brilliant man, he comes here and he supports this group. So why does he do that? What carries him forward? He was instrumental in distributing this knowledge. He did this austerity. He's embarrassed. I did that on purpose. So that's how he established the basis in his devotional life. And Kaliya Krishna, he goes out every day or practically every day on the Harinam, chanting Hare Krishna, singing. So this kind of basis, that's what we want. We want a basis. And from that, but what are these bases? The bases are part of the celebration and part of the distribution of knowledge. Yes?
I've thought a lot about this topic and wrote to ISKCON about it
Mm-hmm.
a few years ago. And in fact, they came to our building and had a little lecture in the basement of our building. We
Mhm.
rented out a little spot. Anyway, it's been on my mind for years, the vegan thing. So lately I've been thinking couple things. Well, Prabhupada kind of showed me in one of his books a couple months ago a part that I always knew was in there, but it came out at me. I forgot to write down where it is, but that even if you pluck a flower, the plant that flower came from benefits if you offer that flower to Krishna. So, of course, Prabhupada wanted us to use milk as far as possible from the farm communities, from protected cows. But even when he was here, they used milk a lot, and it goes against the vegan sensibilities, but it is Prabhupada's, it was what he did. He wanted people to use milk a lot because he knew in his wisdom that people are so addicted to meat from the cow, very addicted. It's all in every corner, And he knew that the blood of the cow in the form of milk, in form of sweets and curd and deep fried curd and all these delicious, sumptuous things, that's what will, you know what I'm trying to say, redirect. You can describe more about that.
Yes, I agree. And in addition to that, he was introducing a culture that can benefit the world with its environmental problems and with many other problems as well. So culture that will that has a theme that's to minimize greed. Absolutely, I think you're making an excellent point. Anyone else? Yes?
Sure, from what I understood, that everything that we offer to the Supreme Lord,
Mhm.
Krishna takes away that karma.
Mm.
And that's why it becomes prasadam. So when we eat that, it has no karma. So even if it's a cow that is going to be slaughtered, or we took that in milk,
Mm.
we offer it to Krishna, right? It becomes prasadam, and on the other hand, that animal also benefits spiritually
Right.
because
that's what I forgot to say.
it's milk, because her milk is being offered to the Supreme Lord. So Krishna helps that living entity to elevate as well, and it goes for every living entity, because living entity in general is one living entity is food for another.
Yes.
Right? So we have to eat living entity. So therefore, the vegetables and the fruits and everything, they're living entity. And every time we offer these fruits and vegetables, they benefit from our offering. And Krishna takes away all the karma, and that's why it becomes prasadam, and that's why we become Krishnatized by eating prasadam all the time.
Exactly. This is exactly our philosophy. And in fact, this concept it's not a new concept. Prabhupada didn't introduce it. Lord Chaitanya didn't introduce it. It's in the Vedas that through the yajna, through sacrifice, through offering, one becomes purified. And in Manu Samhita, it says that the householder should perform 5 different kinds of sacrifices. I can't list what all those are, but the idea is that the ancient culture was based on this idea of sacrifice, and that through sacrifice one becomes purified of one's involuntary and violent acts. We live in a world where even if we don't want to, we involuntarily do things. Especially us, who we don't live simple lives. We live in New York. We're riding in a car and we hit insects with we're killing animals or insects or maybe in the rural area, somebody kills a deer. One devotee told me he hit a deer and he felt so bad. It was horrible. So involuntarily things happen. And we live in a society that's basically, Prabhupada uses this word demon, but the concept of asura, I don't much like the word demon because it's so off-putting. But we live in an asuric society. It's passion and ignorance. These are the qualities of this kind of person, the asura or the so-called demon. The reason I don't like the word demon is because it describes me and my parents and my family and all of my friends, and it describes all the people in this culture. Really, it's people who are mostly influenced by passion and ignorance. So, although Prabhupada introduced that. So, the way to get purified from this is through that's our system, through celebration, or yajna, or festival, or harinam, however you describe it.
Hare Krishna. As we normally do here, you're doing, which is explaining this point of view that the paradigm that we should strive to live by is to give everything to Krishna, and whether it includes something that's covered by fault or not, and you're explaining it philosophically why that's the best way to do things, and so that's normally how we have discourses here, especially because many persons who come here, they don't come in here already signed up to accept the teachings of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For myself, I think I became, once I heard enough things that Srila Prabhupada said in his teachings, at one point I just said, forget it. Including those things that I don't fully understand, I just accept it because I know that this person knows far more than I've ever known, and far more than I ever will know. And so Most people aren't like that, who just walk in here, or even who come in here for a few months or longer. But
Can everyone hear? Should I give you the microphone?
My voice is loud. You can hear me in the back end?
A little bit.
No?
You can talk a little louder.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Sorry. So anyway, just putting it in a summary form. My point is that on the one hand, Dayananda prabhu, you're speaking based on philosophical understanding why we should make our goal to offer everything to Krishna, even if it's covered by fault, which would include, for example, whether it's driving a car that causes pollution. If you're using it for Krishna for a good purpose, then good. If there's some milk and it comes from an animal that's abused, tortured, and worse, but if you're offering it to Krishna, then you make the best of the situation. If that's what you can do, offer to Krishna. So you're explaining philosophically why that's the best thing to do. And I was just raising the point that although most of us don't come in here with a sort of faith that whatever Krishna through Srila Prabhupada teaches, it must be right. For me, that's very important. And I was just wondering if you could say something. This wasn't such a good idea. Right below the speaker. I was wondering if Dayananda prabhu could say something about why. About how much accepting the teachings of God, if you're able to accept them, how important is that in the equation of deciding whether you want to engage in sacrifice to Krishna as the ultimate end all be all, regardless of different material ways of analyzing things, including, let's say, being vegan because it hurts animals to have milk avoided altogether. So anyway, you got my point. Sorry.
Well, I kind of intended to make this presentation a little sort of a philosophical overview. So I agree that it may not have been, there may have been some missing components. But you're saying...
I wasn't saying that at all. Nothing was missing.
Well, anyway, so you're... all right, so you again, your question was what's the motivation then for if you just don't accept that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that you should do this yajna, then why?
And also for persons who are devotees, at what point do you say, wait a second here, I follow Krishna, he has divine laws. Maybe I should consider that his laws, the intelligence that's behind those laws is better than my own ability to analyze. So where does that come into the equation? I mean, there's something to be said for not being a blind follower.
Yeah.
But still, there's something also to be said for the piety that comes with accepting the teachings of the greatest master of all.
Yes, that's a good point. There's something to be said for not being a blind follower, and there's something to be said for being a pious person and following a higher intelligence. So how do you draw that line? Probably with some difficulty. I mean, you're saying that you liked the philosophy in the beginning, but then you decided at some point to accept that Krishna was that greater intelligence. Is that a good summary of what you said? And one of the reasons, I thought, as you said that, I thought, well, a couple of reasons I was impressed by the devotees was first I was impressed by the group of devotees, with like these people here, very nice people, wonderful, intelligent, hip people. And well, I thought one of the ones that I really admired knew the Grateful Dead and all these people. So I thought, wow, he's really hip. He's cool. Of course, they weren't the Grateful Dead yet. They were just sort of this local group. Anyway, so then the next thing that impressed me was that it was part of a culture, that the Krishna consciousness represents an entire culture. So this is something I like to present, that currently there are probably about 300 million people around the world, mostly in India, but around the world who practice this culture. So it's not something, I mean, here we are absorbed in the American culture. We're very used to it, most of us, and or American-like culture, perhaps, and Western culture. That's all we know. So, but there's only 330 million of us. So there's 300 million Vaishnavas. They practice quite a different culture, and it's really based on the Gita. And it's what Prabhupada is presenting. What I'm trying to discuss here is that there are some advanced aspects of this Vaishnava culture. And whether or not you accept that Krishna is, as we say, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whether or not you accept that Krishna is God, you have to at least acknowledge the impact of this culture. It in itself has had a tremendous impact over thousands of years. The American culture is fairly young, and who knows how much trouble it's going to cause in the next 100 years. So culturally, there's something substantial. Then if you read the Gita and you study it a little bit, you try to understand what Krishna is saying. One thing that I didn't mention today is that we're not these bodies, we're soul. So when I first heard this, I thought, wow, that's really interesting. That really captured me philosophically. So that's an important concept. So in the Gita, Krishna explains yoga, where many of us are exposed to yoga exercises, but not so many people know what the philosophy of yoga. It's something, the philosophy of yoga is wonderful. And the philosophy of yoga extends into Tibetan Buddhists use concepts of yoga. The philosophy of yoga is just amazing. These sort of gymnastic exercises are nothing compared to yoga philosophy. So, and Krishna really goes in depth in explaining yoga philosophy. And it's a book of action. The book goes on, is a dialogue on a battlefield. So Krishna discusses action throughout, how one should act, and what are the implications of action. So this is a very fundamental idea that as far as I know, there's nothing that compares to this discussion of action or work. Because we're all working, we're all acting. And in other religions, there's a discussion of morality, there's a discussion of how God wants things to be. In the Quran, there's so much discussion about how God has his plan and how one should worship God and things like that. In the Bible, there are many stories. There's certainly philosophy. And Jesus introduced devotion. But this analysis of action is just fantastic, I think. So yoga, action, just the philosophy, the bhakti philosophy, which begins with the Gita and extends into many other literatures. So yes, it's not necessary to blindly accept that Krishna is God, but if one studies Krishna's presentation in the Gita, one can gradually gain an appreciation. Whether or not you ultimately decide that Krishna is God, I want to be his devotee, that's another thing. But certainly anyone with a little education, little intelligence, can see that here's something substantial. Is that okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
So I think we've gone over time. Maybe a quick question, and I'll promise a quick answer. Yes, Prabhu.
So I have thanks for the class. It was very interesting. So I have a question. You said Buddhism, like Buddhism have yoga philosophy.
Yes. Well, certain aspect. Tibetan Buddhism contains a little bit. Yes.
So, but because
it's not a major theme.
So, but yoga means addition, and then Buddhism like all is one. So like what do you add with it's all addition. So like if you have just one, then there's no meaning of addition. So I just think that their yoga philosophy is not really it may be something, but it doesn't make sense. And then the other thing is because Bhagavad-gita is much older than Buddhists, and when Krishna mentions yoga and he mentions yoga in action, he always says that like in 4th chapter he says like for example for karma he says that all those people who have done karma before they actually had this knowledge of Krishna as the supreme, so they know that his activities are transcendental, and then in that consciousness there is a meaning to yoga. So is it like the Buddhism yoga? That's at least I think that it's not really yoga, it's something else. So
Well, there's so many perspectives on yoga. Just like we have karma yoga, jnana yoga, so Raja yoga. Sometimes people are talking about what is that Vikram yoga. People are inventing. He tried to patent the word yoga.
So is there any value in yoga without Krishna?
So bhakti yoga. So we place the most importance on bhakti yoga. That's and that's my simple answer, because I tend to go on too long and we're over time.
Okay. Thanks very much.